All righty. We're ready. Well, good evening again, everyone. I wanted to first remind everyone that we are recording this session, just as we recorded the last sessions. As you see, you should see the recording little red pulsating ball there. So my name is, depending upon which way you're looking for. My name is Natasha Bias, and on behalf of the Racial Justice Committee at St. John's Parish, Terry Zagar, Donna Zagar, and Elizabeth Moriello and I are going to be presenting honest conversations about racism 2.0, specifically education, we'll discuss. So this evening, and I'll wait for. I don't see the slide, Terry. Excellent, thank you. So again, this is the session on education. The next slide, please. So the goal of this evening's session is to review how the history of racism and inequity in education has affected the access to and the quality of education of African Americans here in the United States. We will discuss the extent to which some laws, judicial decisions, and policies have addressed this prejudice and how it's played out both locally as well as nationally. Some of you who've been with us over the course of the past sessions are aware of the agreement that we all enter into for this conversation. And so with our agreement, in order for us to have open and honest conversations and be fully present, we ask everyone to agree to stay open, to collaborate virtually, to respect each other's confidentiality, to listen fully to one another, to extend grace to one another, because we're all carrying various burdens, to be visible and to embrace one another's company and perspective. It's important for us all to kind of be on one page with this, as we have in the past. And again, we just ask that if you feel that you could not and cannot agree to this, that you just respectfully sign off. Again, this is being recorded so that the slides and the presentation will be made available to everyone through the parish website. Next slide, please.
We will now say a prayer together, and this prayer is by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and we will mute ourselves as we pray together. When our eyes do not see the gravity of racial justice, shake us from our slumber and open our eyes, O Lord. When out of fear we are frozen into inaction, give us a spirit of bravery, O Lord. When we try our best but say the wrong things, give us a spirit of humility, O Lord. When the chaos of this dies down, give us a lasting spirit of solidarity, O Lord. When it becomes easier to point fingers outwards, help us to examine our own hearts, O Lord. God of truth, in your wisdom, enlighten us. God of hope, in your kindness, heal us. Creator of all people, in your generosity, guide us. Amen. And again, that is a prayer that was written by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, we will go through the same agenda that we've been going through in previous weeks. We'll have a content session, a breakout sessions that will be private, they won't be recorded, and we have a group sharing after that. Everything in this presentation, except for the breakout sessions and group sharing, will be recorded and made available on St. John's website along with the slides.
We would like to center ourselves this evening with a quote by Frederick Douglass from his speech in 1894 titled "Blessings of Liberty and Education." He says, "Education means emancipation. It means light and liberty. It means the uplifting of the soul of man into the glorious light of truth, the light by which men can only be made free." So the beginning of public education in America was meant to teach children to read so that they could read the Bible. The first public school in the United States was in 1635, the Boston Latin School. Initially, it only admitted white male students, but this changed over time. Most Southern states between 1740 and 1835 during slavery passed laws making it illegal to teach enslaved children to read or write. Carolina passed the first laws prohibiting slave education in 1740. While there were no limitations on reading or drawing, it became illegal to teach how to write. Plantation owners feared that Black literacy would prove a threat to the slave system. Suppression of Black educational opportunities was used as a means to ensure enslaved people were dependent on their owners. On the right, you see a picture of John W. Fields, who was interviewed in 1937, and he is quoted as saying, "Our ignorance was the greatest hold the South had on us." There were ways that enslaved peoples were able to learn, however. One example is of Lily Ann Granderson. Her grandmother was a Native American, but Granderson herself was born into slavery. Lily learned to read and write from her owner's children, whom she grew up with. For 7 years, she secretly taught people in Kentucky and Mississippi to read. She held the school in the middle of the night when enslaved people could sneak out to attend. Even though there were laws prohibiting white and free Black people from teaching slaves, there was no law that stopped a slave from educating another slave, and so she was never arrested.
Between 1790 and 1820, Baltimore's population nearly doubled and doubled again by 1840. Enslaved and free Black workers were key to this early growth. In the early 1800s, Baltimore was the only place in the state where most Black people were free. By 1830, over 1/3 of the state's free Black people lived in Baltimore. In the city, they could find work and educational opportunities that were largely unavailable elsewhere in Maryland. Next slide. Baltimore Black churches provided education and civic and community meetings for adults that made the church into a platform for political action. In 1787, the Sharp Street Church, United Methodist Church, operated a school and served as a meeting location. In 1797, Black Methodists, supported by Quaker abolitionist group Maryland Society for the Abolition of Slavery, opened a school and meeting house that became known as the African Academy. In 1828, the School for Colored Girls at St. Mary's Court, the Oblate Sisters of Providence, was the first Black Catholic religious order for women in the United States, founded by Mother Mary Lang and Marie Magdalene Ballas, and their mission was the education of children of color. In 1849 was the Roberts versus the City of Boston case. Sarah Roberts was attending an all African-American school that was poorly funded and far from her home. Her parents still had to pay taxes to support local and public schools. In this case, it was argued that Sarah should be allowed to enroll in a public school closer to her house. However, the city of Boston won, saying there was no constitutional basis allowing Roberts to go to this school. This case was unsuccessful because authorities reasoned that special provisions had been made for Black students to have their own school. In 1855, though, Massachusetts legislature did pass a bill providing that no distinction based on color, race, or religion should be made for any student applying for admission to any public school in the state.
So looking a little bit closer to home in Baltimore, we see that in 1826, the Maryland General Assembly created the Baltimore City school system explicitly for white children under the age of 10. And as a result, on September 21st, 1829, Public School Number 1 opened in Baltimore. From the perspective of the free Black families in Baltimore, who you remember were quite a large number, this was seen as unfair since they were forced to pay school taxes to support the very schools that their children were not permitted to attend. Therefore, Black leaders in Baltimore petitioned the city government to provide either A, tax relief, or B, dedicated schools for Black children. Not once, not twice, but on 3 separate occasions in 1839, 1844, and 1850, petitions were presented, which included signatures from both Black and white Baltimore residents requesting some type of action. Despite interracial support, the mayor and the city council rejected every one of these petitions. As you'll recall, the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and the subsequent 14th Amendment, 1865, added impetus to the desire and the clear need for education for Black children, both newly freed and previously free. From 1865 to 1867, African Americans worked to bring public education to the South for the first time. They made alliances with white Republicans to rewrite the Southern state constitutions to guarantee free public education. As we have seen in previous honest conversation sessions, such moves were met with resistance, and in this instance benefited white children much more than Black children. 1870 saw the creation of the M Street High School, also known as the Perry School, and in 1916 was renamed to the Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. It was a public secondary school. For those of you who were able to watch the video entitled Elite Black Public Schools that was provided in the pre-session materials, you will note that it was the first public high school for Black students and had both high academic standards and a highly qualified faculty. Many of its students went on to attend top quality universities. For example, in 1877, Parker Bailey, who was the first Black graduate of Boston Latin School, which we talked about earlier in the session, as the earliest public school in British North America, he went on to attend Harvard College and then became a teacher at the M Street High School.
As we can recall, in between the 1890s and the 1950s, Black codes in the South required the segregation of African American people. Black children were required to attend separate schools from their white counterparts. These schools were overcrowded, the salaries for Black teachers were low, and there were fewer books and desks. Further, there were limits on what Black children could be taught in school. The white school board administrators did not want Black children to be exposed to ideas like equality and freedom. Other struggles were that sharecropper children often missed school either because they were working in the fields or the schools were closed during the planting seasons. There are some court cases. Next slide, please. So in 1896, there was a decision called Plessy versus Ferguson. An African-American man named Homer Plessy was arrested for sitting in the whites-only section of a train car in New Orleans. In its decision in 1896, the Supreme Court stated that separate but equal was constitutional. This provided the foundation for state and local governments in the South and in other states to legally segregate the races in most spheres of public life, including transportation, public accommodations, and public schools. The photos show two schools in Prince Edward County, Virginia. On the left, Moton High School was for Black students, and on the right, Farmville High School was for white students. These schools are separate, but not equal, as you can see. Separate but equal was not the only thing withholding educational opportunities from Black students. In 1899, in the decision Cumming versus the Board of Education of Richmond County, the Supreme Court upholds a local school board's decision to close a free Black public school due to lack of money, even though the district continued to operate two free public white schools. Based on a partnership between Booker T. Washington of the Tuskegee Institute and Julius Rosenwald, president of Sears Roebuck and Company, the Rosenwald Fund between 1917 and 1931 provided over $4 million in matching grants to help build nearly 5,000 Black schools. This was to combat the separate but equal. The schools were built with the health and comfort of both the children and teachers in mind, and it also included teacher residences. 156 of these schools and ancillary structures were built in Maryland. 53 of those structures remain today. In Howard County, the 5-teacher school in Cooksville, the 2-teacher Guilford School, and the 1-room Elkridge School were all Rosenwald schools. The Rosenwald School Building Program played a prominent and pivotal role in the education of African Americans in the early 20th century, allowing thousands of African American children to receive a good education. These schools became obsolete in 1954 with the Supreme Court ruling that outlawed segregation in public education. Unmute, Natasha.
So going to 1926, this is the year that the Scholastic Aptitude Test, what's commonly known as the SAT, was created by Carl Brigham. And Mr. Brigham was a eugenist and a psychologist. And at the time, this was when the US was facing a flood of immigrants, as well as an increasing number of Black Americans migrating throughout the country. These demographic changes threatened many white people, like Brigham. And in his book, A Study of American Intelligence, he claimed that African Americans were on the low end of the racial, ethnic, and/or cultural spectrum. So he had designed this test to specifically identify people of color who could lessen Americans' intelligence. And the test was first used by the United States Army during World War I, and then subsequently and currently for universities for a method of admissions. So Jay Rosner, who is a national admissions expert, test expert, had examined how Mr. Brigham had selected questions for the test. And he noted that there were questions that African Americans would answer correctly were removed from the test. And the questions that white students answered correctly remained within the test, in the test. And so while with this method, Rosner showed that the SAT questions were specifically manipulated to benefit white test takers while discouraging African Americans and other persons of color from taking the test. Next slide, please. And so this is from the Brookings Institute, and this is a graph that shows from 1996 through 2014. It just indicates the race gap in SAT scores, specifically math scores over time. And the top line, the dark line, is the mean score for white students who've taken the test. The bottom line is the mean score for Black students who have taken the test. And then the beige middle is the gap. And as you see, there is the gap. One thing that I will add in this, and the sources are there, and I'll remind everyone that all of these slides have resources that we truly encourage you to dig deeper. But also, just as with any other educational test or program, both races, the scores increased with the affluence of the family. So affluent white families or students, affluent Black families and students, they did higher, even within the gap between the two. So that's something to note. Next slide, please. So Elizabeth had mentioned the Moton School, and there were a number of cases that led to Brown versus a Board of Education. Barbara Jones in 1951, she was a student who created and organized a student strike for equal education. And she was a student of the school where Liz had showed the side-by-side photos of the two Virginia schools. But let's hear about Brown versus Board of Education.
On May 17th, 1954, there were signs. Some of the justices' wives showed up. Some clerks were tipped off. Then reporters rushed the courtroom.
Warren starts off in a bland manner, and you can't tell for a while as he's delivering the opinion what the outcome is going to be. And then he comes to the key line and he says, and we unanimously hold that separate but equal has no place in the Constitution. And it was just electric in the courtroom when he said unanimous.
We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Therefore, we unanimously hold that the plaintiffs are deprived of the equal protection laws guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. Plessy v. Ferguson in education is no more, and in practice, Plessy v. Ferguson itself is no more. The era of Jim Crow, constitutionally speaking, is over.
This was precisely what we urged them, almost in that language. So it was gratifying to have the opinion come down, almost in the language of the argument that we made to them.
In 1951, I'd used a plain geometry book that had been used by a white student in 1935. Brown said that that was over. The hand-me-down tubas that I played in the high school band from the white high schools, it said to me that that was ended. And it said to me that at some point, I would not have to travel from Atlanta to Greencastle in Indiana to get an undergraduate degree, that my family, my cousins, my neighbors, could go to Georgia Tech and to the University of Georgia. The Supreme Court decision of 1954 was for me the Magna Carta. It was the second emancipation. It was a great moment.
So we had the Supreme Court decision in 1954, but then in 1955, there had to be a Brown 2. The Supreme Court had remanded the case back to the lower federal courts, directing that the courts send to the district courts and the school boards orders to proceed with desegregation with all deliberate speed. So you had the ruling in 1954, but things were not moving fast enough. And so although you have a law and you have a policy that urges a change, it doesn't necessarily create the change in people's minds and hearts. And so there are a number of reactions, violent reactions to Brown versus Board of Education and the rulings. Interestingly, in 1956, there were 49% of Americans who were surveyed, and they were asked about how they felt about Black and whites attending the same schools. 61% of Northerners and 15% of Southerners believe that whites and Blacks should attend the same schools. Unfortunately, we don't have a breakdown of actually who made up the 49%. But even with 49%, the percentages are there. In that same year, Tennessee Governor Frank Clement calls the National Guard after white mobs attempt to block the desegregation of a high school. Under court order, the University of Alabama admitted Autherine Lucy, his first African-American student. The white students and residents rioted. Lucy was suspended and then later expelled because she criticized the school. We have in 1957 in Nashville, Miss Hattie Cotton, and this is the photograph that you see is the damage to the east side of the school that she attended. She was one first grader integrating this school, the Hattie Cotton Elementary School, and it was Patricia Watson. And they had a half a day, and later on that day, someone threw a stick of dynamite into the school. Then you have the Little Rock Nine that we know that also the president had to call in the National Guard to protect those 9 students and allow them to go to school. Next slide, please.
So in 1957, after the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, integration in schools began. However, some white parents, as noted, didn't want their children being taught by African-American teachers. As a result, although Black teachers were highly qualified, many of them lost their jobs and were not being hired to teach in the desegregated public schools. African-American teachers are still in a minority today, and both students and teachers are still suffering from the effects of this injustice. Between 1957 and 1958, the Catholic Church in the US made the decision to desegregate all of their schools in response to the Board of Education ruling. This was accompanied by the recognition that in accordance with the teachings of the Catholic Church, children were deserving of an education in a Catholic school, regardless of race or nationality. Bias towards Black children by educators has led to emotional and mental suffering for these children. As an example, when Elijah Cummings, the former Maryland congressman to the House of Representatives, started school, he struggled and was assigned to special education classes. He said that a counselor once told him that he was too slow and spoke too poorly to fulfill his dream of becoming a lawyer. The observation hurt, Cummings said, but it also made him all the more determined to succeed, and succeed he did. On November 14th, 1960, Ruby Bridges, at the age of 6, became one of the first African Americans to attend an all-white public elementary school, the William Frantz Elementary School. As you'll see in this video, she was greeted by an angry mob and had to be escorted by federal marshals.
And chanting 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate.
Residents of downtown New Orleans screaming at a Negro child as she entered the William Frantz Elementary School, first in the city to be integrated.
Once I got into school, all of these people here rushed inside of the building. They were taking out their children. over 500 kids walked out of school that day.
What is your reaction to the court's decision continuing immigration?
I don't want the niggas going in this school.
Well,
It's a white school.
They didn't see a child. They saw change in what they thought was being taken from them. They never saw a child.
So Ruby was one of the first Black children to initiate the desegregation of the New Orleans public schools. Some of you may be old enough to remember in 1971, when the Supreme Court ruled that busing for the purposes of desegregation is constitutional. Schools became more diverse as a result, but some of the white parents were upset again about having their children bused into African-American neighborhoods. This led to violence from some white parents from the Deep South and in Boston and California, placing a burden both on the Black students and their families. In 1972, local courts in the affected states decided that their schools no longer needed to be supervised by the courts in their desegregation process. This resulted in schools meeting only the minimum requirements in integrating their students and in their equal treatment of African-American students. It was a step backwards in achieving equity and racial justice in schools. Here's a video showing some of the reactions to busing for the purposes of desegregation as occurred in Boston, Massachusetts.
It's tearing them apart. People, as a community, it's tearing them apart. They may say this is helping, it's tearing them apart. I'm not for all this. I don't care. My one will not go to school, but it's tearing them apart.
I wouldn't care if they were green or purple. It's the idea of putting my kid on a bus when I have a school right across the street from where they should go. I don't care what color they are.
They'll change it. It's like
It's supposed to be a free
it's
country.
getting in the country now that they're telling you to do this and do this now. And you won't even have no freedom.
All I want is to see from their school. Hey, nothing else. Let us go to our neighborhoods where our kids are safe. We want kids safe. There's no one our neighborhood. If I told you, you wouldn't lie. They'll throw eggs at the window and try to hit people with them.
And there was and while we was in school, there was throwing glass at black people and little kids.
What school was this again?
The Rise of Class.
No way.
If you're not going to disperse, you're going to be arrested.
I think it's gonna be all right if everybody comes and stop being scared, because shoot, I don't think there's nothing to be scared of.
I just got used to selfie high and it's hard to adjust when I was school.
How do you think things are gonna work out here at Roxbury High?
Oh, I guess to work out all right. If the parents to stay out of it all, and let the kids work it out for themselves, it'll be all right.
In 1880, the Ellicott City Colored School opens after an 1879 Maryland state law requiring that counties provide education for African American children. In contrast to white schools in the area, it was a one-room structure without running water, electricity, or central heating. And the building is now a museum displaying the history of African Americans in Howard County and their contributions to our community and beyond. The Harriet Tubman School in Columbia, Maryland, closed in 1965 due to desegregation. It was one of Howard County's best schools, opening in 1949, and it was the only all-Black high school in the county. The building that housed the school is now the Harriet Tubman Cultural Center. The center commemorates the history and importance of the school and the contributions of African Americans in Howard County and beyond. And we all as a group did go there to visit the school, and they have this wonderful tour there.
Continuing in Howard County, specifically Columbia, in 1964, the Rouse Company provided land at no cost to build public schools in Columbia. The developers envisioned an independent year-round school system for its residents. James Rouse sought to create a culturally diverse city where people of all races, religions, and economic levels lived together in the same neighborhoods, worked together, and sent their children to the same schools. This was a year before Howard County officially desegregated its schools and 11 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision. In 1986, Howard County Public School System developed the Black Student Achievement Program. This program works with African American students in order to face educational challenges, to achieve excellence in education, to ensure college and career readiness, and to ultimately excel as future leaders. It provides support to both parents and students. Its founder, Gloria Washington Wallace, said, "The goals of BSAP encourage leadership and self-confidence among Black students and supports their educational achievements. It revives many of the ideals of Harriet Tubman High School that Donna spoke about on the previous slide." In 2006, Howard County enacted its Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance to limit new development in the county unless adequate public roads, schools, and other facilities are provided in a timely manner. As you can maybe see in the accompanying chart, the hashed areas represent parts of Howard County where available public schools are beyond capacity, in some cases at 105 or 115%, and new development is therefore currently restricted. The intent, of course, is to ensure sustainable growth in Howard County, avoid school overcrowding, and ensure a quality community.
So while we have integration and desegregation, there have been studies of recent on the disparities in discipline, both nationally as well as in Howard County. We'll first address national statistics.
We turn to education and the impact tougher discipline policies are having on minority students. It turns out young Black and Hispanic students are far more likely to receive tough school punishments, including suspensions, than white students. Jeffrey Brown has more on the story.
Those were some of the findings in a report released today by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. Overall, the report found African American students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than whites, and 70% of students arrested or referred to law enforcement for disciplinary problems are Black or Latino. The report also looked at disparities in educational opportunities. Speaking today at Howard University in Washington, Education Secretary Arne Duncan said, for example, that schools with a high number of Black and Hispanics are less likely to offer calculus.
Even in schools offering calculus, Hispanics make up 20% of those school student body, but just 10% of the students actually enrolled in calculus. That underrepresentation has to end. Overall, while Black and Hispanics make up 44% of the students in this survey, they make up only 26% of students in gifted and talented programs. Something's wrong with that picture as well.
So it's important for us to look at the disparities in discipline, because discipline practices in schools truly affect not only the social environment of the school, but students' ability and desire to achieve and to excel. And it's essential for students to be able to achieve and excel if they're going to be productive members of a society. Next slide. So there have been a number of movements. The previous slide had statistics from 2012, national statistics. There was a movement, hashtag Police Free Schools. And the National Campaign for Police Free Schools partnered with the former director of the Equity Project at Indiana University, Russell Skiba, and also Indiana University PhD candidate Brittany Bochesney to analyze the hashtag assault at data. And this was a comprehensive search of all news reports on assaults against students by school-based police. And it was conducted by the Advancement Project and the AEJ staff. They identified all such cases that were reported to the news media between January the 1st of 2011 and December 31st of 2021. All of the assaults included in this analysis were documented in local and or national news outlets, including newspapers, broadcast news, and online news. What the study showed was that over 80% of the victims of police assaults in schools since 2011 through 2021 were Black students, that over 1/4 of those students assaulted by police had been students that were with disabilities or labeled as students with disabilities or mental health concerns. Although most of the incidents occurred in high schools, there were a significant number of police assaults against students who were 8 years old and younger. The most frequent type of assault was assaults that included a number of assaults for one occasion in the sense of police force and in the same incident. Over 60% of the police assaults on students resulted in serious injury to the students. Many involved hospitalizations, broken bones, concussions. There were 5 students who actually died at the hands of police assaults since 2011. The fourth most frequent type of assault was sexual assault. And again, this is data that was obtained from a report to news media. And so this is unreported because they only were able to look at those reports that made it to the local or national news. Next slide, please. Here in Howard County, so in 2019, Howard County Public Schools out of school suspensions. This chart shows that the total enrollment of students in Howard County Public Schools, they're 24% African-American, 11% Hispanic, Latino, 6% 2 or more ethnic backgrounds, 22% Asian, 36% white. That's the total number of students enrolled in the breakdown. But when you're looking at those students who were suspended for attacks, threats, or fighting, 68% of those students were Black or African-American. When you're looking at the students who were suspended due to disrespect or disruption, 65% are African-American. When you look at the total percentage of students or number of students who were suspended for other reasons, 55% African-American, and for controlled dangerous substance, 37% were African-American.
So far in this session, we've reviewed the history of Black education and such issues as education availability, built-in bias and standardized tests, school segregation, school busing, reductions in the number of Black teachers, teacher bias towards students of color, and unequal disciplinary actions in schools. For the next 3 slides, we wanted to examine the cumulative impacts of these on Black students in recent times. This chart shows the national percentages of Black children versus white children in grade 8, meeting the proficient level requirements for various subjects: geography, history, civics, science, mathematics, reading, and technology and literacy. It's clear that Black children are lagging behind their white student peers, as you see in this chart. Not shown here, at the high school level, only 57% of Black students have access to math and science courses necessary for college readiness, versus 71% of white students. This table looks at a similar proficient level percentages for the Howard County public school system, whereas the previous slide was nationally looking. This is a good news, bad news story. The percentage of both Black and white students in Howard County achieving a proficient level in their subjects is much higher than the national average shown on the prior chart. But we still have a much lower percentage of Black students meeting the proficient level versus their white counterparts. Note also that students who are within the economically disadvantaged group, independent of race, have much lower overall percentage performance, on a par with the national averages we saw previously. The final table looks at Black and white teacher and student percentages as of 2018 from the National School Board Association. Note that Black children represent 15% of the students in the report, while white children represent 48% of the students. Yet, Black teachers make up only 7% of the teacher population, compared to 79% white teachers, indicating that Black teachers are underrepresented with respect to the overall Black student population. The percentages are especially concerning when you consider that just 8 years before, in 2010, 18% of these same teachers in public schools were Black, versus the 7% shown here, an ominous downward trend. One positive sign here, teacher pay levels appear to be comparable for both Black and white teachers and principals. Based on what we have reviewed so far, the 3 charts suggest that racial bias in school, both direct and indirect, Black teacher employment levels, and family income levels all have an impact on educational achievement levels for the Black student population.
So many of us are aware of Maryland's blueprint for education. It was voted in by the Maryland legislature. The governor, the former governor, had vetoed it, and then the legislature overrode the veto. And so it was to take place in May, or come into effect May of 2021. So with this, there are many ways in which this is going to be paid for, as noted in the overview of the Blueprint for America's Future. That is the program is called New Policies, Timelines, and Funding. And so the one way in which this program is going to be funded is through a process of wealth equalization. And wealth equalization is the purpose is to achieve funding equity, as well as educational opportunities. Should not be, well, let me say that again. The focus and the goal is to achieve funding equity. And the basis is that educational opportunities should not depend on local abilities to generate revenue. Basically, the richer neighborhoods, those students there should not have more opportunities with education than the poorer neighborhoods. So in Maryland, the primary sources of the funding are local tax revenues, are property taxes and income taxes. And so for many years, a significant share of the state education aid has been distributed inversely to local wealth as measured by property accessibility, assessable base, and net taxable income. So what this program strives to do is to provide less state funding to wealthier schools and more state funding to less wealthier school systems. In addition to this wealth equalization, funding is going to come from taxes from online sales, as well as the sports gambling licenses, as well as downloads, online downloads, the taxes that are generated when people download items via the web. Next slide, please. So with this funding, this is what the blueprint wishes to do. That is to revise and create new policies in 5 major areas to be phased in over a 12-year period. And that's 20, fiscal year 2023 to 2034. It's a detailed implementation plan in all 5 policy areas provided by the Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education's final report, which is through 2030. New state and local funding should be $3.5 billion total in fiscal year 2030 to implement the law. And so the 5 areas are, policy area 1 is early childhood. And the goal is that every child ages 3 or 4 will be able to have a full day preschool if they wish to attend one. Also, they want to equalize the standardized testing for kindergartners so that it's not biased in any way. Second area is high quality and diverse teachers and leaders. They want to, increase the number in teachers, about 15,000, and focus on, of course, diversity in teachers. And as we've gone through in this presentation, the statistical numbers, although we have not added other ethnicities, but looking at the statistics regarding the number of teachers who are teaching in public schools, who are white, who are Black, who are Asian, who are Native American, who are Latino and Hispanic. They want to also increase the salaries of the teachers by 10%. So they're proposing that by 2027, the lowest earning salary would be $60,000, that they want to provide teachers with training, course preparation, licenses, and that as teachers increase in the licenses that they get, they have higher salaries. Also, there will be $7,000 additional monies for teachers who are teaching in lower performing districts. Area 3 is college and career readiness. They say by 10th grade, students should either be college or career ready, and that if they are not, they're going to focus on what services that child or that institution needs in order to make sure that these students are college or career ready. Also, policy area 4 is more resources for students who need them. So again, focusing on those students who need the resources the most, and provide it to those students, their families, as well as the schools in which they are learning. And then policy area 5 is accountability, and that is reporting back. Goals, standards need to be met. There are goals that need to be reached. And so those are the 5 policy areas. There's the reference, and the reference 57 is for the overview. And that's only a 54-page document. If you want to look at the actual full legislation in detail, please do so. So at this time, we are going to be divided into our breakout groups for discussion. And Scott is going to send us to our groups. I believe that you will have a prompt to accept the group that you will be invited to. So please do that, and then we will regroup. So we are all back. I truly apologize. Goodness, I think I went to a deep dive with the blueprint, and we had less time to discuss. So I really do want to apologize to the group because of that. So with our last 9 minutes, first, if we could have facilitators just share one takeaway from your group, and then I'd like to move into kind of what can we do to take action, because we do want to take action, and then we'll have our closing prayer, and then looking to the future sessions that we have.
We're going to mute everybody, and Natasha and
Okay, I'll call.
Unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'll start with my group. So Julie, is there anything?
Sure. Just one quick point. We had a few former teachers in our group, so that was fantastic to get their perspectives. Appreciated them sharing. With respect to the blueprint, one of our former teachers just shared about how challenging it is to have large class sizes, and if these resources can go toward reducing class size, increasing the number of teachers we have, it's only going to help kids in the long run.
Mark?
One of the very last pieces that we talked about was having students feel like they were deserving and belonging in a class or situation, and it went past race because we're talking about students that might be taking certain types of classes or whatever, and again just that whole belonging aspect we felt was really important.
Thank you. Teresa?
We did a pretty deep dive on the wealth blueprint as well. One thing that we came away with is that people think it's in good faith, but we weren't really optimistic about how it's going to be implemented, and also the timeline. It's many years out. And one thing else we talked about is the shortage of teachers. And will there be enough teachers around for them to even implement that blueprint?
Thank you. Sarah? Actually, not Sarah. I think you were no longer a facilitator. Marge, were you a facilitator? Thank you.
And our group also did a lot of discussion on the blueprint, and I think we all thought it was a great idea, but the proof was going to be in the pudding. How is it implemented? And we said, money is not going to solve all the problems, because sometimes it's the community's view is, oh, that's a good school, that's a bad school, and getting beyond that. Is that just a code for, that's that school that has all those kids of that race or of that economic group? And that's going to be something that is going to be beyond money. That's going to really need a lot of work and a lot of attention.
Thank you. Terry and Donna?
So echoing some of the comments that have already been made by some of the other facilitators and the other groups, I think we were sort of blessed to have a set of folks who had lived through some of the things that we talked about during the session, in terms of, and also with their children as well, in terms of, whether or not they're allowed into gifted and talented programs if you're children of color, whether or not your teacher who may be Black versus white, in terms of how supportive or non-supportive they may be to you in your educational pursuits. We also, noted that, at the Dunbar School, many of those PhDs were at college level PhDs that were teaching at Dunbar High School, and that they were thus sort of the creme de la creme in terms of their background, and the people there definitely benefited from them. With respect to wealth equalization, I think in general, there was a pro feeling towards it, but also a recognition that there's been a lot of study and background and research that went into it. And I think a general hope that a lot of that research gets communicated as part of the rollout of that program to build up support. And I think in the long run, it'll make a difference.
Thank you. Dave, Peggy?
Yeah, so probably a lot of similar themes. We spent some time in the beginning talking about how timely this topic is with all of the political activity going on around education in our country, and the fear of critical race theory, and the banning of topics from being even taught, and denying the history that we so desperately need to communicate to our children. So that was a very real concern for us at the beginning. And then when we got to the blueprint, one of the comments that was made was, tied it back to the economic discussion we had, that really some of this economic inequality is driven by all the redlining that happened. And so if the blueprint can do some wealth equalization to kind of begin to offset some of that negative impact from the past, that's a good thing. Anyway, just some thoughts that came out of our discussion.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I don't know if I missed any other facilitators.
Susan.
Okay, Susan.
Yeah, just the last question is about what can we do with Howard County Public School System, and that is to, communicate or write to email our Board of Education about this, about getting this into their curriculum. Maybe not our direct presentations, but we could share it with them, and then just say what we've gained from it over these several months and how helpful it would be for our students. So that was it.
Thank
Not
you.
all we
Very
talked about, but the last thing.
No, thank you. Yeah, this was just, providing, I guess, nuggets from each group. And so I appreciate you all sharing. And I guess moving to, what is that, what is it that we can do? And that is one thing where Susan had left off. And it's like, one common comment that we've received throughout these sessions was, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And I think that it's important for us to make sure that we do know it. And as Dave said, the time is like, right, because this is, there are movements to go the other way. But also Donna had shared information regarding the Coretta Scott King Book Awards. And that movement was to share authors, African-American authors, and their works to the masses. And so again, reading is fundamental. And so we have so there are books that have been awarded the Coretta Scott King Book Award. It started in the 70s and it's, today. And so, educating ourselves about subjects. I should have plugged PBS. I told our group that I would be plugging PBS because, PBS is kind of like the unsolicited contributor facilitator in this particular, in our sessions. So please support PBS if you can, because we've received a lot of information from PBS. Also, there is a Sunday, Sarah.
There is a peace march in Baltimore, in Edmonton Avenue on Sunday at 4:00, which is being supported by the Racial Justice Circle in Baltimore, which, as you know, was the organization that sponsored our HCAR1 series. And it's going to be at the site, I believe, of a place where there have been several shootings recently. And personally, I would be very interested to go, but I'm not ready to drive into Edmonton Avenue on my own on Sunday afternoon, 4:00, which would be coming back when it's already getting dark. But I am ready to help organize a carpool if anybody is willing to drive and is interested in going. Maybe they could just, since we're short of time, I don't know whether Joan wants to say something more about that because she's more intimately involved with that than me. But you could just email me if you're interested in going and are ready to drive, and we could maybe arrange a carpool from Wild Lake. That's what I wanted to say since we're short of time.
Thank you.
Just either say in the chat right now and I'll watch what you're saying, or else email me sarahlutrod@gmail.com.
Joan, you're muted.
I just unmuted myself. I just want to say it's the, you remember it's a sophomore at Edmondson High School was killed right across the street. And we'll be across the street, not in the shopping center, but on the sidewalk. We won't be marching. We'll be together and there'll be, you know, we are saying, bring, if you have, bring candles or flashlights. They'll be praying from different faith groups or whatever. And remembering Deontay Dorsey is the name of the young man who died. 4 others were hurt. They did not die, but they were shot.
Are the young man who was killed was actually a graduate from our partner school, Beachfield Elementary Middle School. He had just gone to Edmondson. Yeah.
Right. And your what are we calling it? What do you call St. Bernardine's? Your
Sister Parish.
Sister Parish. I know that they talked about coming, and Bishop Bruce has just put it out in different places, but I know that it was, you know, it's just down the street from St. Bernardine's, and that's so that they are putting it forward too. However, cross your fingers that the weather people help us out too, because it's going to be chilly.
Very.
Thank you. And Sarah shared her email address in the chat.
Julie shared it for me. Thank you, Julie.
Oh, Julie shared it for her. So please.
We'd love to have you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So in looking forward, our next honest conversations about racism discussion is going to be on health. And it's going to actually healthcare, and actually it's healthcare in the whole holistic sense of the word. And that's on April the 19th. On May the 3rd, we'll have a session discussing the criminal justice system. And on the 17th, the way forward, actually, I spelled forward wrong, but anyway, in person, it's going to be in person and at the parish. And so please look out for the flock notes, for the announcements, and also please encourage other people. Thank you. Encourage other people to join us, to join you. It's always good to share knowledge. So if we could please go to our closing prayer. And I just want to thank you again for sharing your time with us, for sharing your experiences, for sharing your hearts with us.
And so we pray. O Lord our God, in your mercy and kindness, no thought of ours is left unnoticed, no desire or concern ignored. You have proven that blessings abound when we fall on our knees in prayer, and so we turn to you in our hour of need. Surrounded by violence and cries for justice, we hear your voice telling us what is required, only to do justice and to love goodness and to walk humbly with your God. Fill us with your mercy so that we in turn may be merciful to others. Strip away pride, suspicion, and racism so that we may seek peace and justice in our communities. Strengthen our hearts so that they beat only to the rhythm of your holy will. Flood our path with your light as we walk humbly toward a future filled with encounter and unity. Be with us, O Lord, in our efforts, for only by the prompting of your grace can we progress toward virtue. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again for sharing your time with us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.